When you look at this cake, you can probably work out that a little less than a quarter has been eaten. The reason you can do it, even though half of the cake's obscured or fuzzy, is because our brains are really good at understanding proportions, and that's why pie charts work. We've evolved to understand height, which is why column charts are effective. And when we see the world, it's all made up of lines, which is why simple line charts work really well. The instincts we have about how images work and how our brain interprets them guides how we would interpret a column chart like this. Our brain instinctively knows that we're trying to compare the height of the columns. Whereas if we show exactly the same data with lines, we instinctively know that we're looking for patterns. And our brain instinctively says that bank B, which is shown at the bottom, has caught up to bank A and might pass it quickly in the future. And the thing we're actually best at understanding is spatial coordinates, or the positions of things. And this is why a lot of the common modern visualizations, like biplots, such as the one shown here, feel easy and natural to interpret. This one here is a biplot showing the concerns that Americans have when they travel. If you look in the top right-hand corner, you can see that when they go to Australia and Great Britain, they're concerned about cost and perhaps boredom. In the bottom right, with France, they have a concern that the people may not be that friendly. I've been to France 4 times in the last year. Not true. On the left, Mexico, there's concerns about cleanliness, safety, and health. I did get food poisoning last time I was in Mexico, sorry. But the problem that people have is that our spatial belief, or our idea that we're good at interpreting space, causes us to make mistakes as well. And the classic one with this visualization here, most people will look at it and go, aha, in food, Egypt and China are seen as being problematic. And the problem is it's a complete misreading of the chart. And the solution with a visualization like this is either to train people in linear algebra, which is a bit hard, or to try and come up with a different visualization where our instinctive interpretation will be correct. This is showing exactly the same data. We still get the same conclusion. France has got a friendliness issue. Australia and Britain have got a cost issue. Mexico a cleanliness issue. But now, our instinctive interpretation, we look at China and Egypt, we can't see anything close. And so we correctly read the map by tapping into the instinct. So the very simple point here is that our brains instinctively believe they know how to interpret certain types of visualizations. And if we get the visualization designed in a way that's inconsistent with the brain, we get into trouble. In the world of design, they've got this belief that there's something called the 5-second rule or the 3-second rule, and it says that when we see a new image, our brain's prepared to give it up to 5 seconds to figure out what it means. And if we can't, we move on. This is why when you see something like this, you implicitly and immediately understand it's depicting the human form. If you're from a Judeo-Christian background, you can go further and you can work out who it is that is in the picture. But when we have abstract art, we do not have an instinctive interpretation at all. And a lot of people complain that they don't get abstract art, they don't find it useful. And I think what they mean is that instinctively, they cannot interpret it. And I'm not showing you this as an accident, because the next visualization was put forward in the Harvard Business Review as presumably an example of best practice. Now, this might be a super fine visualization, and I'm not criticizing it in that level. But what it has as a problem is, instinctively, it means nothing. You look at it and you do not see a visual, you do not get an implicit interpretation. This next visualization, for those of you that are into such things, is often put forward as the best visualization ever. Once it's explained to you, and it takes a while, it will actually make you sad. It tells a very sad story. But if it hasn't been explained to you, you see the branch of a tree. It doesn't give you anything more than that. It doesn't elicit any instinctive interpretation. I think it's true that in many situations we have a very small amount of time to convince people to look at a visual or to persuade them with the information or to inform them. And so we should try and tap into instincts. And fittingly, here in the Netherlands, the father of a lot of this research was a Dutchman who won the Nobel Prize for focusing on the cute little bird up here called the herring gull. This little guy, when he arrives, he looks for his mummy. And his mummy's got a little red spot and he pecks away. and Mummy gives him some food. And as scientists want to do, realising that this bird was attached to their mummy, they took the mummy away and replaced it with a cardboard cutout. And the clever little bird looked at it and pecked away. Pushing the boundary, and he got a Nobel Prize for this, he came up with a two-beaked bird. Doesn't look at all like a bird, but the little guys came out and they still pecked at it. And he went on and he discovered that if he replaced, he could either have a plaster cast of the actual bird's mother or just a red stick. And if he just had the red stick, it actually got a stronger instinctive response. That is, the little birds were more convinced that this was the thing they needed to pick at. Which leads to his idea of what's called a supernormal stimulus, which is a stimulus that elicits a response more strongly than what it evolved for. That is, there are things that we can react to more strongly than even our biology has trained us to. We've learned this in fashion for a very long time. Plastic surgeons have known this for a very long time, if you look at the lips. Toy manufacturers have been designing supernormal stimuli for a very long time. And what I'm going to take you through for the rest of this presentation is how we can make visualizations that tap into it. And this is a summary of it. I'm going to start with the visualization that a friend of mine sent me quite recently. He said to me, "Tim, this is a fantastic visualization." So I'll show it to you. He goes, "It's fantastic." And I said, "It is fantastic. What does it mean?" And my friend said, "I don't know, but I know it's fantastic." So I looked at it for a long time, and the data that this relates to is showing tweeting from a product called Nodexal. So this is a network showing how it got tweeted. And I looked at it, and my brain did find a pattern on the left. It was clearly a Ferris wheel. And my brain, it's a bit strange, I start to see streamers, and then I found some fireworks. And the problem is, the instinctive interpretation I got is obviously unhelpful from the visualization. So I went to the website and read the description. It was a bit complicated, but luckily enough, they had a new improved link, and I clicked on that to see their experimental visualization, which was this. And it might look complex, but your brain probably can start to interpret it and see a pattern from it. When I looked at this, I saw a type of flower, and that told me that I needed to look for how many of these flowers were on the map. And at the left hand, I could clearly see that I had one kind of big flower. I hovered my mouse over the tool, and it made it very clear that these were the tweets from somebody called Mark Smith. I could only see one other kind of flower there. It was a lot smaller. I hovered. It was Nodexal. Now, they're both in the same organisation, and so I was able to quickly determine that most of the interesting Twitter behaviour just came from the organisation, so they didn't get any retweeting of any note. There are a few other things I could find, Lenny, but this was enough. I had basically got the main conclusion. And the way that I'd got it was because the visualization that they initially created was too complicated for my brain, but if enough of it was stripped, so it created a pattern my brain could process, it became easier to interact. This is my vote for the finest visualization of all time. It's the history of the world economy up until the turn of the 19th century. How good is it? Well, look at the top right-hand corner. It shows you the USA. First thing to note, when William Playfair designed it, he used lines, very simple patterns. You can quickly see the history of the US economy. You can see a big dip. It looks like a valley in a mountain range, corresponds to the War of Independence. You can very quickly see that USA is the newest economy in the world. And the one that scares me is you can see the Dark Ages. There are virtually no economies. You get all of that because he used simple little charts, but he did one other less obvious thing. He employed a technique called diagonalization, which is he rearranged all of the rows so that the overall chart itself formed a kind of line. And when you see this chart, your brain instinctively sees the overall line and uses that as a reference point to understand all of the data. This is a more traditional type of visualization that we'd use in branding. I'll give you a little task. The top two rows are showing Diet Coke and Coke. You're all good with data. Try and work out the difference in their positioning. Now, we see lots of charts very quickly. You must have a quick answer. This is exactly the same data, but I've removed the colour because the colour was a distraction. And I've rearranged the rows and columns. Now look at Diet Coke in the second row and Coke in the last row. Very quickly, you can see their positioning is completely different, but you can also see that there's small commonalities. So we can see that Diet Coke does have a little taint of being old and a little taint of being traditional that its competitors don't have. So the visualization more effectively talks to us simply by virtue of the fact it's been redesigned to look like a line. This is some election polling data from Australia. The one at the bottom is the better chart. Why is it better? Well, it's simplified in lots of ways, but two key ways are the data has been smoothed, so the lines are smoother, and that makes it easier for our brains. And the other really weird thing, which is less obvious, when the chart is created, you change the height and the width of it so that the average slope is about 45 degrees. Because it turns out that our brains are great at looking at curves at about 45 degrees, but anything that's really sharp, our brains can't process. Anything that's really flat, we can't differentiate. And it's why the image at the top looks like a city skyline, which is not something we would expect to find a pattern in. Whereas the one at the bottom looks like mountain ranges. And it's relevant to us to go, has the range ended? Is this the tallest mountain? It taps into how we see the world. This chart gave the presentation its name. It's a very ugly chart. It's not mine, and the person who created it didn't quite create it like this. It contains 30 separate time series. It's too much information. The person who created it, however, created it like this. It's still a very ugly chart. Don't get me wrong. I showed it to my wife, and she was not impressed at all, and spent many years in insights. But it's a brilliant chart. 30 time series of data. It goes from 2007 to 11. If I say to you, okay, look at all that data, tell me which market had the most catastrophic decline in the first year. So you're looking at a massive data, and most of you will have spotted capital markets. It instinctively jumps out at you, and the reason it does is all of these charts have been organised to form patterns. There's a line, we see it, it's kind of like, again, mountains, and the mountains keep coming back. Because there's an overall pattern, our brains instinctively spot the things that stand out. The alternative chart, which mostly is used to show time series data, and I've seen quite a few of it at this conference, is this type of chart. Give yourself a challenge, because I'm sure many of you have either created this or paid for this to be created. Tell me what you can figure out about brands C and D. Because you've seen it a lot. You must be good at this by now. Brands C and D. I'm going to show you exactly the same data, but I first want to make a point. The reason you couldn't see brands C and D is there is a pattern, but it's kind of spaghetti, and we don't look for insight in spaghetti. The same data, brand C and brand D. What can you work out? The thing that you can see here is by using it as lots of charts, our brain can see each of them as a pattern. I've again diagonalized it. So it's really easy for our brains to work out that C and D are poor performers because we can quickly compare them. And the last thing is a complete change in the role of colour, and we're back to birds here. This is a satin bower bird. All it does in life is it hunts for blue things. That's its challenge, and it's quite good at it. And colour for us is like that. We're not actually very good at using colour as a way of putting meaning in charts, you know, going this is Coke, this is Pepsi. Our brains aren't designed for it, but they're designed for spotting colours that stand out. This is the most complex of the visualizations in a way. You have to be trained to read this, so it's not a perfect visualization by any means, but this is again showing time series of data. We're using columns to show the most recent wave of the tracker, which is usually what people are wanting to do. They want to see the current result. The numbers on the top are color-coded to indicate if there's been an improvement from the previous wave, and we can see the trend data at the bottom. And now looking at brand C and D, we can see that brand D still performs badly and has always performed badly, whereas brand C, we can see long-term trajectory has declined, but by luck or magnificence, someone turned it around in the last month. And so we've got a series of conclusions that you just couldn't have got without a lot of effort from a traditional visualization. And this is my real point here. You can design them to minimize the effort. It's not about can you get the information. If you work hard enough, you can get the information from any chart. It's just that most people won't try. So my key point is that we should actually try and elicit instinctive interpretations. It's not enough to click a button and go, there's your chart. We have to go a bit further and say, how will the brain interpret the chart? These are the summary points, which just summarizes the things that I've taken you through by example, and then you can download that when you download the presentation when they put it up. Is there anything I can tell you?